I did it with Shelley. Hey, everybody, welcome. This is the Atheist Experience. We are live. Today is Sunday, November 24th, 2019, unless you're watching it in the future, in case it's whatever day it is. But I'm your host, Matt Dillahunty. Joining me this week, Jenna Belk.
Hello.
Ooh, how have you been?
Really good.
You're smiley and upbeat. You are here to keep me from being an asshole.
I got to keep you nice.
It's funny because there were a couple of emails. Granted, there's 50,000 people who watch the show in the first week or whatever, and we get like 2 emails with people like, "Oh, I think Matt was really quick to hang up on some people last week," which was extra funny because I noted it during the show. I was like, "Am I in a mood? Am I hanging up on people just a little too quickly this week?" And one of them has called back, so we'll get to that person. It's entirely possible that I may be too quick to hang up on people. Even if it turned out I was right, like if I knew enough that this call is not going to go anywhere good and productive, let's get to one of the other people who've been on hold. Let's show some respect to our audience. Even if I'm right, it requires a little explanation. Plus, I can be wrong.
Wow.
I'm probably not, but yeah, I can be. So yeah, we've got Friendsgiving coming up this Thursday.
Yeah.
Here at the ACA, our replacement for Thanksgiving, Turkey Day, whatever you want to call it. There's going to be turducken being smoked and
Yum. I'm hungry now.
Yeah, I've got a bunch of stuff to do. I've got videos and stuff that I'm going to shoot on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday so that I can get everything done for November and December. But that brings up another point that was complained about. Somebody was like, "Oh, Matt just keeps saying when somebody calls in, 'Oh, I've done a video about this on the Atheist Debates.'" Well, not everybody's necessarily seen that. Yes, that's the point. That's the point of telling people. So after 15 years of hosting this TV show, there's a lot of conversations that have been had. There's a lot of subjects. And so I have my own thing. In addition, it's patreon.com/atheist debates, or you can go on YouTube and find it. YouTube, just search for Matt Dillahunty or Atheist Debates. The point is the reason I mention it is, one, so that people know about it. And two, so that if somebody's calling in about a particular thing, if I ask them if they've seen that video and they haven't, I may be able to save us a bunch of time by saying, go watch that video, get your thoughts together after having seen what my thoughts are going to be, and then maybe we'll have a more productive call. But I get it. I often go to shorthand, and people might think, "Oh, well, he's just trying to throw them off to Atheist Debates." No, I just want us to have better and better callers. Because some of us here have answered the same question over and over again for 15 years. Yeah. And I'm happy to sit here and keep answering it for new people, but there may be a better way to do this.
Find the answers, and then if you still have questions, come back.
Yeah. So did you have anything in particular that you needed to talk about before we jump in on the calls?
Not today.
I don't know that there's other announcements other than this program is sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin, a nonprofit educational organization promoting positive atheism and the separation of religion and government. But more importantly, it's here at the ACA FREETHOUGHT Library, 1507 West KOENIG Lane, a building that is open 7 days a week, roughly from 11 to 9. And after this program's over, we will be having dinner here at the building. Any atheist or atheist-friendly person is welcome to come down and join us. But if you're coming down to preach, proselytize, or provoke, don't do that. Just call in and tell us what you believe and why, and we'd be happy to have a conversation.
Yeah.
Because that's the fun part. I'm going to take this one first because, it's an easy, uncontentious subject where Gohan had called in to Talk Heathen with questions about abortion. And I figure this is such an easy topic. We should just start the show with it. So, plus I asked him to call. So how you doing, Gohan?
Pretty good. How about you guys?
I'm all right. I think I can short circuit this without you having to go through your 6 questions and all of that, because.
Well, before you do that, I just want to say thank you for your service going in the Navy. That's not something I was brave enough to do, and I'm still of age to do it. I'm just not brave enough to do it.
I don't consider it brave at all. I was literally 18 and out of other options and did it, and I was in for like 8 years. But I appreciate your thanking me.
You put your life on the line for me, so thank you.
I'm not convinced I actually put my life on the line for anybody, but, that's a fantasy that somebody's built up in your head. But anyway, I appreciate that. On this, so I've already, you talked about you'd seen the debate that I did with Christian Kruszelnicki, and of course, my view of abortion rights. I don't really particularly care whether somebody thinks it's moral or immoral.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard you say that before.
I'm more concerned with whether or not it's legal. But if we're going to have this conversation, you came up with what is, in my mind, a fairly common objection to the bodily autonomy thing. Because my view is, does any anyone have the right to use someone else's body without their consent? And if the answer is no, then a fetus, even if it was in there doing calculus and going to solve cancer, it still doesn't have the right to use a woman's body without their consent. And you came up with the conjoined twins example and a particular version of it where you have two conjoined twins and one of them can survive without the other, but the other one's dependent on it. And the response to that's a simple question, or a couple simple questions. Is a woman born...
Going crazy. Sorry.
Your dogs are going crazy. It must be my high-pitched voice.
No. There's another dog outside. Okay.
I don't know. Your phone keeps kind of going quiet with all that. So, is a woman born pregnant?
No.
Okay. So the difference is that when those conjoined twins are born, while they are separate persons with separate brains, they are born interdependent, and they don't have the right to establish ownership over their shared body independent of the other one. And so that's why it's a flawed analogy when we're talking about a woman who becomes pregnant. Because abortion,
I feel like
abortion is not the right to...
Analogy.
Sorry, what?
I was saying, like, with pregnancy, almost any analogy is going to be flawed.
Exactly. So let's stop using them and let's actually talk about the case in fact.
So you're against using analogies?
If the analogy is flawed...
Just kind of with this example.
If an analogy is flawed, not all analogies are flawed to this extent, but if you're in agreement that you're not going to be able to come up with an analogy for pregnancy that is going to lead us to a conclusion about pregnancy, then let's stop using them. And why not?
No, yeah, I didn't say that. I said all analogies are not like the exact same, but I think it can lead us to a conclusion, especially about bodily autonomy.
Except that it can't.
Well, I would say that you said before that bodily autonomy, there's no situation where you can have someone use somebody else's body without their consent. I would say this is a situation. So
no, you're not using. No, you're wrong. You're wrong. This is the point where the analogy is flawed. This is what I'm trying to point out. A woman isn't born pregnant. There wasn't a situation where the two individuals, where one of them had rights that were co-opted by another. When you talk about the conjoined twins, they were born, both of them having equal claim over the shared portion of the body. And that is why the analogy is flawed, and it does not apply to pregnancy. Sorry, what?
Do you think the claim of who has more rights over their body switches depending on dependency?
Who else has right over my body?
Nobody has right over somebody else's body.
So dependency doesn't matter.
Correct.
So then
this is the whole point. Hang on, pause. This is the whole point of the violinist argument. If I'm kidnapped and hooked up to someone, they don't, and their life is now dependent on mine. I'm kidnapped by somebody, and they hook me up to that other person to the point that that person's life is now dependent on mine. That doesn't put an obligation on me. I may choose to stay hooked up to them or not, but under no circumstances am I obligated to remain connected to that person because they don't have a right to use my body without my consent.
Yeah, and that's kind of going along with other arguments that I've heard you make before.
Yes, because I'm consistent.
And courts with people not having to donate or anything like that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so...
But conjoined twins are different because it's not one twin using another's body. It's two people with one shared body that they have shared rights.
No, but it wouldn't be a shared body.
It is a shared body. That's conjoined twins. By definition, it's a shared body.
What do you think it is if it's not a shared body?
If they're not dependent on each other,
if they're not dependent on each other, then they can be separated. And we've separated conjoined twins that are joined by just...
What if one is dependent while the other is not dependent?
Then the one that's dependent is dependent on things that are that agent's body. It's a shared thing.
His body or hers, right. So in that case, it is coming down to dependency because
it's not coming down to dependency. It's coming down to the fact that, okay, here's two people who are born conjoined, but they share a heart. They both have equal claim to that heart.
Okay. So what if, as they develop, they become adults and now actually only one twin needs the other to survive and the other could survive without the other twin?
Okay, you're not paying attention. The one...
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little lost with your
I figured this was going to be incredibly easy, but you're not paying attention. These are two thinking beings that share a part of a body. The fact that one of them doesn't necessarily need something other than what they would leave with. How do you, if it's one heart, let's say, how do you determine which one you're going to give the heart to? Because I can cut these. Hey, stop. The fact that the heart may be in, Jenna and I are now conjoined twins, and she's the only one with a heart because I'm a heartless motherfucker. The heart is in her chest. I'm dependent upon that heart. She is not dependent on anything that happens to be in my chest. But our bodies are conjoined. That is my heart, and it is her heart.
Right.
This is why this is
sounding pretty darn close to fetus mother.
No, it's absolutely not.
So hold on. So is a fetus born with my heart if I get pregnant? Does that fetus have, if I get pregnant right now and I have a baby, does that fetus share my heart?
It relies on your heart.
But does it have my heart? Is my heart part of that fetus's body?
Was there a time when Jenna did not have a fetus in her that was reliant upon her heart?
Yes.
Was there a time that one of those conjoined twins was not dependent on the heart that they're sharing?
Yeah, in this example.
No, there's not.
That now they are not dependent on the other heart.
No, you're not paying attention. Was there time when one of those twins was not dependent on the heart that they share?
Yes.
No, there wasn't.
When?
When was that?
It's right. So in this example, I'm saying right now, it's not dependent on the other one's heart.
You just said that one of the two isn't dependent on the other's heart, but it's not the other's. It's the other one doesn't. They are sharing a heart.
Right.
So when did the first fetus not share that heart? When did it have something other than that heart?
It's the only heart it's ever had.
When did the fetus?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm getting lost with the two analogies.
Sorry.
When did the fetus not have that heart?
When did the conjoined twin not have that?
One of the twins. You're saying,
Okay,
hold on, you said that one of the twins
not share the heart.
Okay, this is becoming rapidly a waste of time. There are two.
There's too many analogies.
No, the analogy's fucking flawed, which is what I was trying to point out. There is no point.
It's not
oh my God, shut up. There was no point.
Why are you being so rude?
Because
I'm trying to explain something and you keep interrupting. There was no.
I feel like we've had a pretty productive conversation.
I don't.
I don't. Does anybody out there think we've had a really productive conversation? Because I explained something that's incredibly simple. And because you have a bias where you are trying to argue against a position, you're not seeing the simplicity of this. Here, a woman and a fetus, two separate entities. The woman existed completely independent, was never dependent upon a fetus, never had to share anything with the fetus. The fetus comes along afterwards and attaches itself to her, and now it is completely dependent. And now it is using another person's body without their consent. When in the case of conjoined twins with a shared heart, both people require that heart and always have. It wasn't like one person walked up and attached them to somebody else and said, I'm now going to use the heart that was yours. That heart was never Jenna's, it was ours.
So I think if I can try to sum up, you're saying the problem with the analogy is that in the past, with the fetus is always dependent on it. But with the conjoined twins, no.
No, what he's saying is that the twins were born together, and me and the fetus would not have been born together.
Okay, so in the past, the mother was not dependent on the fetus.
Correct.
Right?
The mother's never been dependent on
the mother is not dependent on any fetus.
And at one time, there was no fetus.
So, but with the problem with my analogy is that in the past, forever, the two twins have always been dependent on each other.
The problem with your analogy is this: two twins, one heart. You are assuming that heart belongs to one and not both.
Well, I didn't say it's the heart. I mean,
whatever. It doesn't matter what it is. Maybe it's a brain. Maybe that's the problem with this call. Right. Are you sharing a brain with somebody?
Or a body or anything. The fact is that they were born together.
I'd be happy to share a brain with everybody.
Okay.
I mean,
but thanks. We're done. I figured this would be a really quick and easy thing because the analogy that you came up with is horribly flawed. The only thing that I'm saying with respect to abortion rights and legality is about whether or not a person has a right to use somebody else's body without their consent. And you come up with an analogy that is, well, what about conjoined twins in this particularly weird situation where if we were to separate them, one would survive and one wouldn't? Well, the reason one wouldn't is because they were born, both of them dependent upon that heart. And you seem to be deciding that geography, that the heart is in Jenna's chest, means that we can, we could separate and Matt would die, but we'll leave the heart in Jenna's chest. Well, why don't we just separate, but pull that heart and put it in my chest? Because I have just as much claim to it, and that's the thing. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about a heart or whatever the thing may be. Now, the thing is, he can't get over this flawed analogy. There are really cool issues related to that analogy outside of that. One example is that if we can separate conjoined twins, where neither of them are dependent on something that is geographically located separate from the normalized body container, we do separate them. But what happens if Jenna and I are conjoined twins and things that are in this part of the geography are going to kill us both unless we separate and allow Jenna to live? Do we have a right? Does Jenna have a right to force that separation? Because if we don't separate, we both die. And if we do separate, Jenna lives. Now, I think all of us would agree that I would be incredibly selfish to say, nope, if I'm going to die, you're going to die. Mm-hmm. And so I think most of us would say, by all means, separate and you go on about your life. But the question then becomes, does Jenna have the right to say, I'm separating from you because it's going to kill me if I don't, even though it's going to kill you? That is an interesting moral quandary that we may or may not have a good answer to.
But it's not as simple as, and it's not as common as pregnancy.
But it's not like, hey, here's every woman, every cis woman or any woman with ovaries and the ability to reproduce, running around constantly facing the prospect that at any given time, whether it be through unprotected sex or a failure of birth control, they
sexual
wind up
assault.
pregnant. And people like you want to argue that they are now forced to serve as a life support system for that entity. And one of the problems here is that these same people also trivialize pregnancy because, gosh, it happened to everybody. My mom had to be pregnant in order to have me, and infant mortality rates and deaths from pregnancies have dramatically declined as our medical knowledge has increased. So obviously pregnancy is trivial. But the truth of the matter is pregnancy is not trivial. It fundamentally changes a woman's body forever, and you're overlooking all the consequences related to actually having and taking care of a child, or, well, you can give it up for adoption. You don't get to use that argument.
Not everybody can.
Yeah. The issue here is even if it's a person, which I don't necessarily think that a cluster of cells should qualify for personhood, but personhood isn't the issue, which is why people arguing in favor of abortion should stop using it and rely, in my opinion, on bodily rights. Because, like I said, even if it's in there doing calculus in the womb, that's going to lead to a cancer cure for the entirety of humanity, that still doesn't give it the right to use a woman's body without her consent. Mm-hmm. And that's why I started the show with it, because I knew that'd be really easy.
Good call.
It only took like 20 minutes, nothing to it. We've solved abortion. Richard's on from Malaysia. You're on with Jenna and Matt.
Hi, Richard.
Hi, Matt. Hi, Jenna. How are you guys? Thanks for taking my call.
We're doing well. What do you got for us?
Okay, first I'd like to just state two principles, then I'll go on to my question. My first principle is that the person who asserts that God exists and tells someone else, asserts that to another person, has the burden of proof to prove to the person objectively that God exists.
We agree.
So, right. Second is that I don't know is a very valid and rational answer to a question.
You are on an amazing trajectory. You could be hosting this show in a very short period of time.
So far.
Well, thank you for telling me that. Okay, now, so this is my belief, because I've had personal experiences which I feel are directly with God, but they are internal, they're intuitional, and I cannot demonstrate that to others. Yep. So I was thinking about how to deal with this. But it occurred to me that it could well be that all of us have, instead of 5 physical senses, we have 6 physical senses. And the 6th sense is this thing that, for the time being, let's just call it intuition for simplicity. And it's just very underdeveloped in most people, but some people have it in an extreme level. People like, automatic writers, Neil Donald Walsh, who wrote Conversations with God.
Can I pause for?
So do you think? What do you think?
I want to pause for a couple seconds here, because first of all, there's no sense in us numbering this and saying it's a 6th sense, because the traditional notion that we have 5 senses is already flawed. Because even if you go beyond sight, hearing, taste, touch, etc., you also have a sense of direction. You have a sense of bodily awareness. There's tons of physical senses that we actually have. So we shouldn't bother trying to.
All right.
But what you're talking about, this notion of intuition, is actually something that's been suggested by theologians, and it's referred to as the sensus divinitatis, or divinatus. I'll probably get it wrong because I don't speak Latin, and neither does it really anybody else. It's a dead language. But the notion that we have some sort of divine sense is this notion that people have used to prop up contemplatives. Now, first of all, automatic writing isn't really a thing. That is pseudoscientific woo that has never demonstrated any sort of effectiveness. The same thing with remote viewing and all this other stuff. But what it seems that you're getting to is you have some sort of internal feeling that you interpret as being at least support for the notion that there's a God, right?
Yes, sir.
Do you have that sort of internal feeling about things that you've turned out to be wrong about?
Trying not to be. Well, that's the thing, you see. When you have a perception and experience, then you think about it, and then you make a rational decision whether it makes sense or not. Because when you're having that experience, you don't really analyze it sometimes, especially if it comes upon you suddenly.
Right.
So I've thought about this for a long time, and this is what I've got, because I can't refute what I had, the experience I had. And it coincides with a genre of experiences many people have had over the ages or claim to have had. So,
but we know that people.
It's no proof.
We know that people.
Objectively,
we know that people experience things that turn out to be incorrect, or their interpretation of their experience turns out to be incorrect. We know that happens.
Right.
So it seems to me that if you have an experience, that you should answer "I don't know," which you're fine with, until such time as you do know, until such time as there's evidential support that a particular interpretation or understanding of that experience is most likely the right one.
Well, that's the thing, you see. If everybody is only able to have an internal experience of a thing and they can't demonstrate it to others, but if many people have had that sort of an experience over time, then rationally, rationally you have to ask yourself if that is a valid experience you are having, even though you can't really repeat it, you can't demonstrate it to others.
Yes,
because instincts is something that even scientists have instincts when they go down a certain path.
Yes, you should ask yourself that, but what answer should you reach?
Well, the answer could be that's the thing. You can't prove it one way or the other objectively.
And so, therefore, if this does not prove something one way or the other, then you should not reach a conclusion that it's true.
Can I use an example that I learned that might help kind of put this in a little bit of a metaphorical picture for you? If you and I are in a jungle and there's a big bush and there could be a lion behind it, something moves and it could be something dangerous that's going to come and eat us, okay? And we both have this instinctive feeling that something is going to come out and attack us and we're going to die, okay?
Okay.
You have the feeling it's there, and I have the feeling it's there, but I say, you know what? I'm not going to go with that. I don't think it's there. You say you do, so you run.
Right.
Is there a possibility that we could be wrong?
Yes, there is a possibility.
Okay.
But that possibility doesn't mean that we are wrong.
Correct.
I'm not saying that you are. All I'm saying is that I have the feeling that there may be something there, but I don't think that there's enough evidence for me to go with that. There's a possibility that I could go to hell because I'm not convinced, but up until this point, I've never seen any evidence of that lion.
So in Jenna's example, if there is a lion in the bushes and Jenna gets eaten and you don't, then you're liable to think that you had this intuition that a lion was there. But the truth is, you might have just been lucky. It might, because your intuition may have had nothing to do with whether or not there was a lion there. It's not like you were necessarily sensing a lion. You may have just had an inductive inference or gotten lucky. So even if Jenna gets eaten, we don't know anything at all.
If I was
Hang on.
sensing the lion, that's my problem. The thing is,
how would you show, if you can't show, Richard,
only to one person.
Richard, if you can't show, that's the point, then you don't know.
But could it be objective only to yourself? Because
no, there's no such thing as objective only to yourself. That is by definition subjective.
Okay. Let me think about that.
Cool. Okay. Thank you. Hey, that was really I really like that response.
The thing is, the
go ahead, sir.
The only issue here is that if you both sensed it, and Jenna decides to go in and explore the bush and does not encounter a lion, that also doesn't prove that your sense was wrong or that her sense was wrong. Because maybe the lion went off and moved away. Maybe the lion has a sense of when it's being sensed and it moved off. You can do this forever. Or maybe it just luckily walked off. So when you start talking about, I have a sneaking suspicion that, or I have an intuition that, if there's no way to test it, then yeah, you can still go with it. You can say, I have a friend, by the way, who won't go ice skating because he's absolutely terrified, or was, that he would fall and someone would skate over his fingers and slice his fingers off. And I even pulled up the ice skates to show them that these are not, generally speaking, some of them are sharper than others, but generally speaking, they're not sharp razor blades. And that the likelihood of something like that happening is so outlandish and preposterous. I mean, I'm sure somebody's going to find somebody who, like, a skate came down and chopped off somebody's, and that's possible. But if your fear is not proportional to the evidence and the likelihood for it, then you have what we would call an irrational fear. And so if there's no way to test whether or not your conclusions that you're making are reasonably based on the evidence supporting them, then the method is flawed. And this is why we don't merely rely on intuition. Do scientists have intuitions? Yeah. We live our lives every day by inference and induction because today is pretty much the same as yesterday. And when somebody like a scientist observes a phenomenon and then they have an intuition, maybe it's this kind of thing. What they're doing is essentially arguing from analogy, that they've seen something else before and maybe it's like this. And they could be right. But until you can test it and show, you don't know.
Okay. Well, can I ask you something? Because I know that you used to be, a card-carrying Christian. You're almost, you're going to enter the seminary and be a preacher and all of that. And you turned away at some point when you questioned the logical foundations of your faith.
Yeah.
Do you think you would have turned away from God, in quotes, God, if you were born or you were acquainted with a religion that was not so obviously logically flawed as Christianity?
I have no idea. No idea. I'm not aware of any religions that
are less flawed.
Well, there are certainly some that are more. And what religions have done, the religions that succeed, are really good at creating these sorts of defense mechanisms so that by making it seem real, but making it just untestable enough that you can never know, then it keeps people running around going, well, it could be. Well, how do you know it's not? You can't prove it's wrong. You can't prove it's wrong. And so it keeps people believing something. And what I came to realize was that I can't believe something just because I am incapable of showing that it's not true. What I need is evidence for it. And so that would apply to every religion, at least that I'm familiar with. If there's some religion out there that actually has evidence for it. But I can't tell you what would happen had I been born and raised differently, because then I'd be living a different life. I don't know if I would have come to an understanding of skepticism at all.
Sounds like you've got a good head on your shoulders.
Intelligent. Sorry?
Sounds like you've got a good head on your shoulders. Like you're doing you're asking yourself some honest questions.
Right. So why do people think you're mean? You're making a lot of sense.
I'll tell you why.
Because not
I'm not
everyone's
convinced.
as honest.
I'm not convinced out of my personal positions. I'm just thinking about what you're saying, and I have to think about it more. But
I'll tell you why people think I'm mean, and I'll be brutally honest. Sometimes I am. Sometimes I'm not. And no. I have been. I have been wrong. I have been arrogant, condescending, dismissive. I have been rude. But when we're talking about something that goes to somebody's core, when this belief is foundational to who they are, even addressing the belief itself without addressing the person feels like a personal attack to them. And if they're not in a position where they understand logical fallacies, when they're not in a position where they appreciate the need for evidence, they get pushed into a corner where the only thing they can do is lash out, and some of them will say that I'm mean when I'm not.
I see. Well, I think you're doing a great service for mankind.
Thank you.
Aw.
We try.
Because you're being very rational about it. And since you're so rational, anything that's irrational can't stand in the face of pure reason, calm, collected rationality. So all the bullshit religions which don't make sense would not have existed if everyone took that stance, because in the first place, if they claim that there is a God, if I claim there's a God, how can God be irrational? In fact, my first experience with God convinced me so clearly that God is rational, completely sensible. I don't know. I just can't explain it that way. And I started moving away from formal religion. Out of that experience with God, can you believe that? I mean, it sounds so contradictory to call into the show and say that. But,
I don't know what you believe.
Let me say something that'll blow your mind. Because all these people who are like, oh, you can't prove there's not like an intuition where somebody could intuit that a God exists. Until you define God. Because under the God of classical theism, the God that exists in most religions, where there's a God who actually wants you to know that he exists, no such God that was wise and intelligent and understood evidence and epistemology and reason would ever implant a subjective sense into individuals to tune to him, because he would understand that this would always be a flawed detection mechanism. And so the only God that makes sense in that sense, if there is a God that wants people to know that he exists, is one that willingly, eagerly, actively presents himself to everyone in a way that is not prone to simple subjective assessments, but can in fact be measured, tested, etc.
It's so beautifully stated. So beautifully stated, Matt.
Thank you.
I agree.
I've done this once or twice. But I'm going to move on to some other callers, Richard. We appreciate your time.
Okay,
Thanks for calling.
All right, thanks. Have a good one. Thanks, guys. Bye.
He sounds so nice.
Yeah. Oh, it's actually one of the things, in part, I've done the show and everything else, but I'm reluctant to even say the book I'm working on since it's so on hold. But it's one of the primary purposes to show that the world that we experience is in conflict with almost every God notion that's ever been presented. And it's why I got into an argument with a caller recently, because my question was, if a Damascus Road experience is good enough for Saul, then it should be good enough for all of us. Otherwise, God is playing favorites. And God is then relying on us to depend on Saul's experience as if that would be the same as if it were our experience. And so that notion is in conflict with a God that would understand the nature of evidence. And so really what you've got with these God notions is, here's a God who created everything, created us, stuck us in a world, set up the rules of this world, gave us a brain to assess things, and then made everything within reality seemingly subject to this notion of experimentation, of independent confirmation, where that is the best way to understand everything. But the single most important issue of all, his own existence, he made impervious to that process. Now, that makes no sense. This is very much like, you wake up every day and there's a note on the refrigerator that's supposed to be from a parent that you've never met with instructions for what you're supposed to do with your life. And then one day you find out that, it's this social worker who comes over and puts this note on the refrigerator door every day. And you're like, hey, wait a minute, you're not my mom. I got this note from your mom. And then you do more investigating and you find out that, in fact, the social worker's never met your mom, just is writing down what she feels your mom would want you to do. Now, there's no way to ever prove that your mom doesn't exist or that your mom's not somehow conveying secret information to the social worker. But there comes a point where you have to make a decision about, am I going to pay any attention to the notes on the door? Because none of this seems to be in my best interest. None of this seems to be coming from someone who loves me. And by the way, if this person loves me, where the hell are they?
Yep.
It's, it's like I have a girlfriend, but she goes to another school, you wouldn't know her type thing. I have a God. He just is impervious to your science. But anyway, we've got Caleb, and it says Penn. I'm going to assume it's Pennsylvania, maybe Penn State. Who knows? You're on with Jenna and Matt.
Hi, Caleb.
Hey, Jenna and Matt. So good to be on. I love your show.
Thank you.
And yes,
how
that
can
is
we help?
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania.
Yeah, for sure. So I was calling in because I deconverted fairly recently, about 6 to 7 months ago, and I actually got married about a year ago, and we were both Christians at the time that we got married. When I told my wife that I had, started deconverting and that I didn't really believe in any of the claims of Christianity anymore, she had kind of the hardest to deal with reaction of it, I thought, which it just kind of broke her heart. There was no anger or anything like that. She was just so sad. Yeah. And I think, I don't know, this is kind of a broad question, but how do you go forward with something like that? Because she still kind of does want to raise any kids that we have. We don't have any kids yet, but in the future as Christians, which I'm definitely not comfortable with. And there's just there are a lot of things like that where, and she doesn't really want me to talk to her family or tell her side of the family that I'm an atheist now, because her dad would get super pissed about that. I just don't know if there's a great way of dealing with that.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, because I'm going to have some incredibly hard truths.
So just to kind of show you that I can relate a little bit, I got married 3 years ago, and I deconverted a year ago. And we had a Christian wedding. We had a pastor. And I had decided at the time that I wasn't a Catholic anymore, but I still believed in God, so I kind of wanted to have a Christian wedding, so I did that. So my husband married a Christian. And then I deconverted and found out I wasn't a Christian, and I was an atheist. And then I kept asking him questions, so the same kind of questions that I'd asked myself, and then he realized that he was an atheist. So I got really, really lucky there. But the fact is, and that's something that I realized, is that at that moment when I deconverted and I lost my faith and I had a Christian wedding, I had agreed to include God in my marriage and in my relationship. And at that point, I'm a different person. I can't honor those vows anymore. So our relationship going forward has to be different. We have to agree to change the relationship in a way that we're both satisfied with it. And so you're going to have to sit down, in my opinion, you're going to have to sit down with her and figure out if she's actually okay with moving forward with a relationship with somebody who does not believe in the same thing she does, that does not hold the same worldview. If you don't want to raise your kids Christian and she does, that's going to present problems. And so you're just going to have to both be very, very honest with how you feel, because that's going to be really hard, because this is a really rough, I'm sure a very emotional thing. I'm wondering, would she be willing to do that, do you think?
So I think she would be willing to have that conversation, because at least verbally she's fine with the idea of me not being a Christian anymore. She's not not fine with it, but it's not like something she was going to leave me over or anything like that. I think she would 100% be willing to have that conversation. And I actually suggested maybe that we both need to see a secular counselor, because we got marriage counseling before, but it was from a pastor, which is just kind of useless. So she is open to the idea of seeing like a couples therapist that is secular, that wouldn't, be inserting a Christian point of view into that.
That is huge.
Yeah.
Most Christians would not be okay with that.
There's another question.
No, I was happy about that.
Are either or both of you fine with the notion of not having kids?
Yes, actually, that's something that we started talking about recently. Honestly, it came up because we went to Disney World together, and we were like, holy shit, this would be so much less fun. It's so nice to just be able to not have any responsibilities doing this.
Yeah.
That's kind of what opened up, like, maybe we don't need kids.
Because I'll say this, irrespective of whether the issue is two people with different religious beliefs or two people with whatever, bringing kids into the world is a monumental responsibility. And if you don't have all the conversations that you need to have, you are already starting off on the wrong foot if you have a kid and just hope that things will work out. I was in court last week finalizing my divorce and watched other people going up there. And I watched the judge interact because this one couple had agreed to no geographical restrictions on custody. And it's because they both lived in the same town and in roughly the same neighborhood. And the judge is like, yes, but that may not always be the case. What if she ends up dating or married to somebody who doesn't like you or whose job takes them to Seattle? Are you okay with you have to make sure that you consider those possibilities. And if you're just going to consider it at the time that you're trying to do your divorce and not when you're discussing whether or not to have kids, that's a big issue. But the second thing is, you mentioned that, your father-in-law would be pissed. Mm-hmm. Is this something that you two think you can keep secret comfortably?
I don't think so. I think that's eventually going to come out in some way or another. That's not sustainable.
I don't know your particular situation, but if you think it's not sustainable, then that's another conversation you got to have. One of the things, there's a number of keys to relationships. And speaking as a newly divorced man, let me tell you how to have a good relationship. Because I do have a good relationship. Beth and I are still very good friends. After we got done with the divorce, we pulled up, I dropped her off at home, I kissed her goodbye, and then I went back to the rest of my life. She will be one of my best friends for the rest of my life. The keys are honest, open communication, a willingness to compromise, but perhaps more importantly, a willingness to know where you cannot compromise. And so if one person wants to have kids and that is an uncompromisable thing, by trying to get them to compromise on that, you are essentially setting them up to be miserable in about something significant for the entirety of your relationship. And yeah.
The one thing that I want to just mention is that if just keep in mind that I'm sorry, I just got thrown off. Don't hold anything back. Don't try to say, this is what I'm okay with and be, kind of shy about it, because if you're hoping that at some point maybe she'll change her mind, she might be hoping that at some point you might change your mind, and that might not ever happen. And that's what I've noticed a lot of people do is they're like, oh, but you know what? It'll be better later. Yeah,
don't set this up where you're trying to fix each other on the sly, because that's a bad thing.
And don't try to change each other.
Yeah, one of the other aspects of this is that I know people who have been in relationships where one's a believer and one's not, and it works. I mean, Dawn was married to a Catholic man for years and was with him for years, even before they got married, and it worked. I know me. There are certain things that people could believe or have beliefs that they hold dear where I could not be in a long-term relationship with them. I can still be friends with them. I can hang out and do other stuff, but marriage is slightly different. And none of this is going to be easy. And one of the hard truths when I talk about, let me tell you how to have a good relationship, sometimes divorce is, in fact, the best thing for everybody. That was the case with me and Beth. She's generally doing better. I'm generally doing better. And it's one of the reasons that we're still friends. Mm-hmm. It's because even though things got bad at a point or there were arguments or whatever else, recognizing that perhaps this notion that you are to be with one person and one person only for the entirety of your life, A, isn't necessarily true, and B, doesn't mean you found that person when you think you found that person. And so you just make sure that you're going into all this with your eyes open and realize that, maybe your marriage will work out, maybe it won't. Maybe one of you will change back or change in a different way, maybe they won't. Maybe going childless is an option, maybe it's not. Because I've known people who are like, oh, I'm never going to have kids.
Yeah, me too.
And then they get to a certain point and they're like, we need to have kids. I have some very good friends of mine who did that. They were going to remain childless, and now they've got 2 wonderful kids. People change, and recognizing that that's the case, communication's the key.
Yeah.
And it's got to be open and honest.
Agreed.
So stop calling into us to get our opinion and talk to your wife.
Sounds good. Well, hey, I really appreciate the advice and the hard truths.
Absolutely. Thanks for calling, Caleb. I appreciate it. And
You.
And we understand this type of thing's not easy. And I'd also recommend both Recovering from Religion and seculartherapist.org because they might be able to network you with other people you are not the only mixed religion couple on the planet.
What was the second website that you said?
Secular Therapy. And actually, you'll find that through Recovering from Religion. The Secular Therapist Project is designed to make sure that they can put you in touch with therapists who they're not atheists bashing religion. They are just, when you go into therapy, they're not going to start talking about your spiritual life and how much you guys need to pray together.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's really helpful.
Yep.
Awesome.
And let us know,
Awesome.
how it goes. Give us a call back and if things improve or get worse or whatever, because one of the things is that not only are you not alone, but people need to hear these stories, and they don't just need to hear the fortunate success story of Jenna, who got married, changed her views, and now her husband's in agreement with her, or my story of how my divorce wasn't really a traumatic thing and we're still friends, because sometimes divorces are just awful. Mm-hmm. But
yeah.
Anyway, thanks for calling, Caleb.
For better or for worse, I will call back and let you know how it goes. There's a change.
And congratulations on your deconversion.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Take care.
Bye.
All right, where do we go next?
Let's go Canadian Catholic.
Oh, boy. I don't know if she was going to say that. Canadian Catholic, welcome back to the show. How are you?
Hi, it's an honor to be back, both you, Jenna, and Matt.
Hi.
Very nice hosts.
Awesome.
So what have you got for today?
So here's what I would like to say. Both of you are ex-Christians who became atheists, and I was in the same boat. And I like to say I'm kind of one step ahead of you now, because
Yes, I'm aware of that, and we had this. This is what got us off on the wrong foot last week, because I'm not convinced that we were in the same boat, nor am I convinced that you're a step ahead of us. But go right ahead.
Okay, so my story. I deconverted from being a committed Christian. It was more of a fundamentalist form. And I became a full-blown atheist, an inner circle atheist. I was into it. I was reading books. I still talk with David Silverman, people like that.
Do you think that that's what makes you an atheist?
No, I lacked belief in God.
I don't know. I still don't know what an inner circle atheist is. And I will ask you to not mention David Silverman again for fear that I will say something about that piece of shit.
Excuse me. So inner circle atheist, basically it's a colloquial term that for someone who was, in the inner circle, who understood inner workings of atheism. It's just a colloquial I use.
Okay, what are the inner workings of atheism? Because my view, and you'll have to forgive me because I'm only the guy who's been doing this show for 15 years and has been, running around on stage with, Dawkins and Harris and everybody else. I'm not aware of any inner workings of atheism. Atheism is simply the position of not being convinced that a God exists.
Oh, sure. I agree with that. I just meant, there are atheists who become atheists when they're disappointed with their church, and there are atheists who become atheists because of logical reasons and who make a conscious decision that there is little evidence for God. That's the camp I belong to. I consciously became an atheist.
Right.
Okay.
I agree that there are atheists who become atheists for bad reasons and atheists who become atheists for good reasons. But what that seems to suggest is that you've found good reasons to believe in a God now.
Yes, but I don't want to pursue that line where we just go into preponderance of evidence. I would just like to concentrate on one point on how my view has changed and maybe hear your view on what's your view.
Okay.
Is that fine? Okay, so when I was an atheist, one of the biggest hurdles to returning to religion was this issue of afterlife. Because I used to think, for example, that all the evidence seems to suggest that consciousness is purely physical. When a child is small and its brain isn't developed as well, it is less conscious than someone whose brain is developed well. So that was one of the biggest.
Yeah.
How do you know that?
Not only is that not, so I would agree that the evidence shows that consciousness is a product of the physical and that everything we know and understand about consciousness seems to end with a person's death. But I don't know that I would say that a child is less conscious than an adult, less cognitively or less knowledgeable. I mean, they could have incredible cognitive capacity, but yeah, I think that argument that a child is less conscious, that's flawed.
There was different reasons, but basically you understand, I used to think just like you that consciousness is purely an emergent property of the physical workings of the brain.
I will correct something.
Please.
It's not that I'm asserting that consciousness is merely a physical product of the workings of the brain. It's that I don't see evidence that anything else, that there's anything else contributing to it, and I don't know how one would demonstrate a supernatural component to anything.
Yeah. So, yes. So I probably went one step ahead of you back then, and I used to assert that all the evidence seems to suggest a purely physical origin for consciousness, because when we were to look how you can manipulate the brain, this used to be a huge hurdle for me in believing in afterlife or anything transcendental.
It should be, but so whether or not you went a step further to assert that the brain is in fact purely physical, that may have been an error, but I have no problem saying that based on the available evidence, there's no reason to conclude that anything beyond the physical is required for.
So I would like to now. I would like to now share my perspective on how it has changed. Okay, how my view has changed.
Sure.
I've become a devout Catholic now. I'm into Roman Catholicism. I am all of it. I love the Bible. I love Catholicism. And, I never thought that I would be a member of religion ever again, let alone such a highly structured and organized religion like Roman Catholicism. And it was a surprise. But I'll tell you, I can't tell you the whole story. Let's just start with something small, how my view changed about consciousness.
Yep.
Okay, go for it.
So what I started realizing personally is if you were to look at the brain, it essentially is a highly complex machine, right? A natural machine, biological machine, but machine nonetheless. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I were to look at a cockroach's nervous system, a cockroach, for example, is, it has instincts that help it survive, evolutionary instincts that have developed that help it survive. But it does not really have anything that can be described as consciousness. Okay? So figured, yeah.
You're saying that a cockroach isn't conscious?
Yeah, not in the way we are.
Well, okay, I would. So maybe we're having a problem with defining consciousness because quite often, and bear with me for a moment here because this might be slightly lengthy. There, quite often, what we refer to as consciousness is simply a notion of self-awareness and the possibility of self-reflection. Then there's the other thing, which is a little more difficult to define, which is sentience, which is a pronounced sense of self, I would suppose. So the fact that a cockroach, I would argue perhaps has conscious agency, even if it is merely running on instinct and intuition, in the sense that it's an agent and it will, it can move away from the heat sources and light sources and things like that. And so however rudimentary the programming is within the brain, to look at human beings and suggest that ours is so much more advanced that it's something special is something that I cannot do for the same reason.
That was not where I was leading.
I know. Well, I don't know that. But I mean, for the same reason, I can't rule out whether or not a computer created by humans could ever achieve sentience, consciousness, et cetera.
So to just continue what I was trying to say, the consciousness that I'm talking about is the ability to be self-aware, not simply have memory that helps you survive, but to be able to be aware as these processes happen. So my problem was, here is where I started thinking, if you have a cockroach, right, and the cockroach has a system, it allows it to escape, it allows it to recognize where there is danger, to feel some sort of, sense of fear, maybe some primitive sense. And my issue was, if you made that mechanism more complex, that cockroach brain, you would have a more complex way of achieving the same instinct-driven, goals. But
Sure.
at no point do you reach a point where this mechanism becomes aware of itself.
Okay, and see, here's where we disagree. Because I don't know how you can have a self-preservation instinct without a sense of self. And it may be that the thing we're in disagreement about is what is often called a theory of mind, where human beings have not only a sense of self, but have the ability to think as if they were another agent. So like I can sit here and say, how would Jenna answer this call had I not been sitting here? I can think in those terms. And this is what human beings do in the sense of this sort of intentional stance, to put yourself in somebody's brain to figure out what their intentions are towards you. Now, that's certainly different than merely a sense of self, which you would be required. So there'd have to be some awareness of self in order to have self-preservation. And so if that's what you're talking about, that cockroaches don't have a theory of mind, I don't know how you can get to say, cockroaches have a program that has a self-preservation, but there's no way to increase the complexity of that to then achieve a theory of mind. I don't know how you can make that assertion.
Well, my point is that if you make something like a cockroach's brain or nervous system more complex, you'll achieve the same things in a more complex way.
Oh, no. See, that I don't necessarily agree with, because I don't know how you can say that our brain isn't just a more complex version of exactly what the cockroach does.
I mean, again, you could say that, but there is no physical point at which we can say, after this complexity, the brain becomes aware of itself.
Okay.
So just because we don't know what that point is, or if that point exists, doesn't mean we can rule it out. And you are apparently ruling it out. You are saying no matter how complex, if you began with something like a cockroach's mind, you couldn't ever get to the sort of theory of mind that humans have. And I don't know how you determined that you can't do that just because we don't know. That would seem to be a sort of argument from ignorance.
There is no mechanism of action that shows such a thing as possible.
That you know of.
Yes, but why do we need to assume such things if we already do not understand?
We're not assuming. We just don't rule stuff out just because we're unaware of it. And that seems to be what you've done. You have said that you have reached the conclusion that there's no way to start with like a cockroach's brain, increase the complexity, and wind up with a human's brain. And I don't know how you can reach that conclusion while you simultaneously acknowledge that it is based on the fact that we don't know of a mechanism that would allow it. That is fundamentally the same as saying biological evolution cannot happen because we didn't know the mechanism for it.
Mm-hmm. No, I understand what you're trying to say, but it's also a different thing. I do think that you could increase the complexity of a cockroach's brain to reach the complexity of a human brain. But what I think, where I think the physical evidence points to is this, that if you increase the complexity of the cockroach's brain, you make the cockroach do the same things in a more complex way. It will be able to escape better, to feel danger.
So I tell you what you need to do then is go do that experiment to support your hypothesis, which is all you have.
Right. Yep.
So your perspective on the brain still remains a physicalist position?
I have no evidence to lead me to that there's anything more than the physical.
I understand, but let's put aside the physical supernatural distinction for a second, and here is where I'm aware there are many other callers, so I won't take too much time. I'll just make a point really quickly. here is the way I look at it. The way I look at it is that the consciousness is related, the mind and the consciousness is related to the physical brain, but it's not the same. It's not.
Prove it.
Yeah.
Prove it.
Sorry?
Why do you see it that way?
So here's the thing. You started with an interesting hypothesis, and you've done nothing to demonstrate it other than to say we don't know of a mechanism that would allow this, and use that spurious reasoning to serve as a foundation that led you ultimately to Catholicism. And so what I'm saying is, if you think that you have this hypothesis about minds and neural networks, then you should work to prove that and demonstrate it, and not just run with it because you can't think of any way that it could happen. But that's a failure of imagination. That is definitionally an argument from personal incredulity.
I disagree. What I think is that when we look at it, right, when we observe the evidence, at least we have to be open-minded to the possibility of the consciousness being something that we currently cannot explain in terms of physical.
Wait, what evidence are you looking at?
Hang on. I'm absolutely open to that. I'm saying that I don't get to conclude that until you present the evidence for it.
You said when we look at the evidence.
You don't get to pretend as if I've closed off the possibility that there's something more than the physical when I've repeatedly said that I have no evidence that something more than the physical is needed or has been demonstrated.
I understand, but could it be...
I don't think you do understand. You keep saying you understand, but I'm not convinced that you do. Prove you understand.
No, I totally understand. I was in your shoes. Like I said, I was...
No, I don't think you were in his shoes.
I swear I'm getting ready to hang up on you again. Prove that you understand.
Yes, I know what goes through your mind right now, and I...
Whoa.
Goodbye,
wow.
Captain Jackass.
I can read your mind, Matt. I know exactly what you're thinking right now.
I can read your mind. I'm a step beyond you. Now, this is the guy that I hung up on last week.
Gave him a lot more time this week.
I gave him a ton more time. Tried to get him to recognize that he had an interesting hypothesis. How would we go about proving it? And that my position is not, you are incorrect in your conclusion. My position is, your foundation does not lead to your conclusion. Identified fallacies, and all I got was, I understand. No, you don't. Please demonstrate to me that you understand. Oh, I know what you're thinking. I was where you were. Stop thinking you're beyond everybody else when you're fucking not. This is really simple. We don't have a full understanding of consciousness or anything else.
A lot of things.
And if in fact there's something beyond the physical, that would need to be demonstrated, not just assumed. And if you're assuming it because you look around and you just can't find a mechanism to explain why humans have a theory of mind and cockroaches perhaps, by the way, do not, because how did you prove that cockroaches don't have a theory of mind? And how do you demonstrate that this isn't, that a theory of mind, the ability to take on the intentional stance of another thinking agent, is something that can't be reached through an increase in neural pathways?
I'm wondering how you can prove that a cockroach isn't self-aware.
Yeah, well, I think that they would have to be. Because
right.
I don't understand how you could have self-preservation without some sense of self.
Yeah.
Because it's not like if we created a wind-up mechanical, like gears and everything, cockroach, and gave it instructions, a little robot, we could program the robot to take actions. But only with something like a computer-type brain could we give it a proper sense of self-awareness to allow self-preservation. However, at what point is there consciousness? At what point is there sentience? At what point this is the arrogant view of humans. We're not special. There's no evidence that we are special. There's evidence that we are superior at some things and inferior at other things. I can't run as fast as a cheetah. I can't survive in a number of different landscapes like some other animals. I can't regrow limbs the way a starfish can. And so we pick the things that are significant about us where it appears that we are better, and we look at those as if, oh, this is the pinnacle of evolution. Oh, wait, We shouldn't say evolution. We are clearly designed differently and better. We're special. And I would agree that there is something about cognition, that there's something about the thought processes that humans are capable of that is superior to every other living thing on Earth that we know, and it is clearly beneficial.
Look at all the humans.
Is it the most important thing? I don't know. It's one of the most important things to us, surely. And yes, it's a big advantage. It puts us at the top of the food chain despite the fact that we're not the fastest or the strongest or any of that stuff. But when you say you can't get from a cockroach to humans, you're basically denying a fundamental fact of evolution, because you might as well have said that you can't get from the foundations of biological life to modern humans. And yet, as a Catholic, as he is, Catholics are generally fine with the teaching of evolution, although most of them probably think God came in and tinkered a little bit to make human beings
Adam and Eve
special.
were apes.
And that's probably essentially where he was going to go, is if you can't get from A to B without a God, then God came in and did something with our genetics that made us separate from the other great apes. And that argument fundamentally boils down to an argument from personal incredulity, which is just, I cannot imagine how we got from one of the great apes to this intellectually superior great ape. And yet, instead of comparing us to cockroaches, why don't you compare us to the other great apes? Why don't you compare us to our chimpanzee cousins, who have clearly a sense of self-awareness in addition to self-preservation, who have group dynamics, who have a sense of fairness, and have a theory of mind and can learn to communicate with human beings through sign language? Why is it that you have to set up human beings versus cockroaches in order to say there's no way to bridge that gap? Why aren't you drawing it between human beings and our cousins? Because if you did that, you'd have to acknowledge that there's only maybe a little more ability here, but nothing foundationally different. And then you would have to compare our closest cousins to their closest cousins with lesser cognitive ability. And you would have to do this in this staggering little thing. And you know where you end up? Something like fucking cockroaches. And yet, you're reaching this conclusion, it just can't happen. Yeah. It's a fallacy. And so, as I suspected, while he was an atheist, an inner workings atheist. By the way, if you're one of the inner workings atheists and you haven't reached out to contact us here at the Atheist Experience yet, why not? What do we do to irritate you guys? How do I get in that club?
I want to be an inner working atheist.
I know. I mean, it seems, I'm on the board. I'm on the president here at the Atheist Community of Austin. I'm on the board of directors for American Atheists. I'm at conventions all the time. I'm going in December. I'm going to go spend a week in the UK for the Cambridge Skeptic Society's 10th anniversary event.
You're in the unholy trinity.
I'm in the unholy trinity. How the fuck am I not in the inner circle, inner workings atheists? I mean,
yeah.
Clearly they're afraid of me.
Hey, I don't know.
I'm terrified. All right, where are we going next?
Richard.
Richard in Arizona. You're on with Jenna and Matt.
Hey there.
Hi, Richard.
Hi.
Hi. Actually, I think my call ties in pretty well with what we were just talking about.
Perfect.
Perfect.
That does not bode well.
Well, I'm going to reverse my points. I was calling, I'm going to make an argument. I am an atheist, but I'm going to make the argument not that God does exist, but that he will exist.
Okay.
Okay.
Would you get upset if I tried to short circuit this from the outset?
Go right ahead.
How do you make an argument for something that's going to happen in the future? Because wouldn't you have to rule out that everything will cease to exist through something unknown at any point?
Well, we make the argument that climate change would happen in the future, right?
Yes, but that's about what will happen based on the current trend. That doesn't mean that
Right.
that doesn't mean that tomorrow the universe, like maybe there's an asteroid that's going to hit the Earth and demolish the Earth entirely before climate change destroys us. Nobody's saying
Right,
X
correct.
will happen.
No, I'm not saying that X definitely will happen. I'm saying that it might happen. It's a possibility.
Oh, so instead of having an argument that God will exist, you have an argument that God might exist at some point in the future?
Exactly.
Is it because we've gone from cockroaches to human beings, and you're arguing that that trend will continue until something has godlike intelligence?
Basically.
Yeah, what's godlike intelligence?
Well, I mean, I was going to define God as in the maximals, maximally,
But how do you demonstrate?
Can do anything and knows everything.
Yeah, how do you demonstrate that because there's a trend that we see towards improvement, that there isn't a place in which we cannot reach? Like, how do you show that it's not like an asymptotic or hyperbolic thing where you never actually reach that?
Sure. Well, okay, can I present the argument real quickly? It's just two premises.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, premise one is that AI is a real thing, that we'll be able to reach a human level of AI. I think the only counter to that is that, metaphysical stuff, we are biological computers, so it's something that AI already exists. It's just going to get to that point.
I missed the God.
We're not there yet.
Oh, okay.
So premise one is basically we will eventually create a computer that will have human level artificial intelligence.
Okay.
And the argument for that is that essentially we're just a chemical computer instead. So if at some point we could reach the point where we could basically duplicate brains, we would be creating human level AI, whether it's done through a chemical process or through nanotechnology with microcomputers or quantum computing. Go ahead.
Okay.
Premise two.
Okay. Premise two is that nanotechnology is also a real technology, that it's in its infancy, and eventually we will be able to construct machines on a molecular scale.
Sure.
Okay, then the conclusion is that eventually the entire planet will be composed of networked intelligent matter.
Okay, so first I'm going to beat you up for the fact that you have two premises that don't include the terms that are actually in the conclusion, so you have an invalid syllogism from the outset. Premise one is X, premise two is Y, and the conclusion is C. Your terms do not propagate through your argument, so it's an invalid structure. Second of all, premise one, we're going to use your invalid structure to show something. Premise one, we have successfully built vessels that can travel faster than the ones previously. So like once upon a time, we had planes that could fly at 100 miles an hour, and then we got some to 700 miles an hour, and then we were able to exceed and leave the atmosphere. Does that mean that we will ever be able to travel at or faster than the speed of light?
No.
Okay.
And also this has a lot to do with exponential curves, which almost always level off. But I'm arguing that in this case, the curve will not level off. That's known as the technological singularity, which I'm pretty sure you are aware of.
Yeah, it's science fiction until such time as it becomes a reality. But you haven't done anything to demonstrate that the Earth will be overrun with this just because we can do it. Because by the time we can do it, maybe the Earth won't even exist.
Yeah, but the trend has been demonstrated. There's the law of accelerating returns.
A trend is not.
It's a trend.
We went over this at the beginning.
Climate change is also a trend.
There's a trend for how far we can leave the Earth and at what speeds, but there may be a limit that you're unaware of.
That is correct. Yes, so there may be a limit that I'm unaware of.
Yeah. So basically, you called in with a science fiction argument that maybe something of incredibly high intelligence might exist in the future. And I would argue that what you've argued for doesn't qualify as a god under any of the conventional, it's certainly not under the omnis, which is what you mentioned, because all powerful, all intelligent doesn't necessarily mean that that is an attainable thing, that one could have all knowledge. And so the most you can get to is what some modern theologians do, which is this God has all knowledge that is logically possible and physically possible.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I said in the beginning. Maximal,
Sure.
Is everywhere, can do anything,
Yeah,
But,
and I still stand by the fact that not only was your syllogism invalidly structured, but the fact that there's a trend towards a maximal does not mean that maximal will ever be reached or that it can be reached.
Okay, I would like to, point to Ray Kurzweil.
Yeah, I don't care. We're done. Yeah, I don't care about the transhumanist stuff and the singularity because it's science fiction, and when it's not stops being science fiction, that's the time to believe in it. However, I am very much in favor of let's continue to work on increasing health and human longevity so that perhaps we can live closer to forever than we currently are with our, 7 to 10 decades or so, 11 decades maybe if we're on the outside of it. But yeah, no, I'm not interested in wasting the last 15 minutes talking about transhumanism. At least not in the science fiction sense, especially from somebody who couldn't put together a valid syllogism. Guillermo in California, you're on with Jenna and Matt.
Hello.
Hello, Matt. I have a question about faith.
Okay.
If you have faith, do you believe in faith to begin with?
Well, that's a strange question. So there are a number of different ways to define faith. My definition of faith, faith is the excuse people give for believing something when they don't have a good reason. Because if you have a good reason and somebody says, why do you believe this? You give the reason. And when you don't have a good reason and somebody says, why do you believe this? You make an appeal to faith. Do you have a different definition of faith that you're trying to use?
No. Well, one time I was talking to a friend in the gym, and I brought up the subject about God and having faith and stuff like that. And he said, okay, let me ask you something. When you get in your car and drive, you have faith that the brakes are going to work.
No, see, that usage of faith simply means confidence in the absence of absolute certainty. But I don't think we can be absolute certain of anything. So my confidence that my brakes are working are, first of all, based on a past track record of the brakes working, an understanding of how they work, an understanding of the maintenance that I have or haven't done on them. And that confidence is proportional to that evidence, and it is subject to revision. Like, I just got a notice. I've got a 2016 Silverado. I just got a notice that there's a recall because there is, in fact, there are some models or some trucks within that model where you may have to gradually increase your pressure on the brake, and so they want me to bring it in. Now, despite the fact that I haven't had any problem with my brakes, I'm going to take it in. But my confidence that my brakes are working is based on evidence, and it's not an absolute certainty. So that when somebody says, do you trust that your brakes work? I give all of those things, and at no point do I say, I have faith that my brakes work.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Cool.
Yeah.
I think he learned something.
The people who want to use faith to justify religion are appealing to faith in a different context. If all you mean is you trust something when you're not absolutely sure, yeah, we all do that.
Just say that.
The issue here is, do you have a good reason to trust this? The other ones that come up are you have faith that this chair will hold you up.
Right.
Well, I have confidence because this chair has always held me up. I also weigh less than I used to, so that confidence has increased a little bit. The chair is older, and that modifies my confidence down. It's a particularly uncomfortable chair, but you have faith that your spouse isn't cheating on you.
Well, it's dependent on a lot of things. It's not just blind. It's not just blind
Are you
trust.
absolutely certain that your spouse is not cheating on you right now?
Mm-mm.
See? Do you think your spouse is cheating on you right now? Mm-mm. No. And by the way, isn't it possible that you could have a relationship that's fundamentally different from the monogamous binding relationships that other people have, such that what counts as cheating within their relationship wouldn't necessarily count as cheating within another one? This is an oversimplification. And what it is also an example of a fallacy, which has a name called the tu-quoque fallacy, which is, it simply means you do it too. It's also called whataboutism. And so what's happened is people say, oh, you have just this blind faith in your religion. And so the religious people come back and say, well, you have faith too.
Oh.
And my faith isn't blind. I've experienced the Holy Spirit and all this other stuff.
Yours is blind.
Yeah. Yours is blind. No. There's a number of different usages for the word faith. I don't really have a use for any of them. And if you want to say that I have faith that my brakes work, okay, fine. But that is not the same as I have faith that there is a God.
Right.
That's a confidence. Tony in New York. You're on with Jenna and Matt. How are you?
How you doing, Miss Jenna, Mr. Matt?
Pretty good.
Glad to hear it. So I don't know if you need to see what the cross can put down for you, but I believe that there is a God, but I don't believe in conventional religion. I just believe that He communicates with us in a different way that than we don't really perceive as regular communication, I guess.
Are you on a cell phone?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, that's so much clearer. It's like you had the microphone like in your mouth for a second and now it's clear. So I couldn't quite understand what you said. You don't believe in a conventional God, but you believe in a God that what?
I don't believe in conventional religion, but I do believe in God, ultimately.
Okay.
I do believe that there is an ultimate creator.
Okay.
But I believe that he uses math to, like, communicate with us. That's
math? M-A-T-H, math?
Yeah, M-A-T-H.
Okay.
Because it's the only thing that ends up being true. Like, I grew up Catholic, just to give you some background.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized, like, Catholicism is kind of crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So I converted to Christianity. And then I really started reading the Bible. And then I realized, well, the Bible itself is just kind of crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So far, you're on the same path that I was.
But ultimately, I believe that there is something that made us and put us here.
Why?
I just don't believe he cares about us in general because there's a bigger, like, there's a whole planet to be concerned about, and we're just a small spectrum of the bigger thing. So I believe it's all about the numbers because the only thing that's really true and accurate is 2 + 2. Because if we weren't able to use that, we wouldn't be able to get into space. You know what I mean?
So let's try and sort this out. So you believe in a God. What do you know about that God? What are its characteristics or properties?
Well, okay. What I believe is that the characteristics of God would be he would be ever-knowing, or all-knowing, and ever-present. Right?
Why would you believe that there's anything that fits that description?
All right, because again, I look at this as from a scientific point of view. All right, so science would say that if you look at an artist drawing a picture, if the picture were alive, the picture wouldn't be able to see the artist, right?
If the picture were alive, I don't. If the picture were alive, I don't know why it wouldn't be able to see the artist.
Because of it's in 2 dimensions, and the artist would be in 3 dimensions. It's stuck on that paper.
Oh,
Okay.
Okay. So
You're thinking it's just outside of our dimension, so we just can't sense it.
Correct. However, the artist can interact with that 2nd dimension, and God's way of interacting with us would be through math, because it's the only thing that communicates with every single dimension.
So what does he communicate to us with math?
I don't believe he really cares about us in general. I believe it's just about the numbers, like statistics, ratios.
Okay. So you believe in a God that created us, that we cannot detect, and that doesn't care about us. If we can't detect it, how could you ever be rationally justified in believing that it exists?
Looking around at the bigger picture, I mean, it's hard to think that. Again, I understand this goes back to the watchmaker fallacy, but it's difficult to look at this marble and say that it wasn't put here for a reason, and all the ratios.
No, it's not that difficult. I can look at this marble that we live on, and I can be fine with the notion that it wasn't intentionally put here for a reason.
But I understand why it's difficult. I thought it was difficult too because it just made me feel more comfortable.
Well, I understand how it can feel difficult.
Yeah.
But here,
just try thinking about it.
The question I'm getting to is, you're saying that you believe in something that you can't detect, and yet you're telling me about its properties. You suspect that it doesn't care about us, or you suspect that it's trying to communicate with through math, but then maybe it's not trying to communicate with us at all. If you ultimately believe in a God that is undetectable and indifferent, how is the God you believe in, how is that God's existence in any way different from your perspective than its non-existence?
All right. I get what you're saying. But, all right, me being the painting, looking, trying to see my artist and not being able to doesn't mean I shouldn't try to understand what my artist is trying to explain through me.
Why?
So, but you're assuming that there's an artist. And so when we look at, for example, you don't just get to assume that, because when we look at biology, we have physics, chemistry that lead to biology that explain the origins of everything in the universe. We understand how planets form. We understand how stars form. We don't necessarily know how the universe began, but we have some models about those sorts of things, and none of them require or depend on an appeal to an artist.
Yes, that's true, but all those things can be broken down by math.
Yes. But are you saying math is God?
Ultimately, I like to think that's the way he communicates. That's the thing he used to design the universe.
If it's what you like to think, isn't that different from whether or not you have good reason to think it's true?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that last part. If it's what I like to think, what?
You say you like to think that this is how God communicates, but if it's not, how do you demonstrate that it's true, that what you think is correct?
Because math is the only thing that hasn't lied. I mean, languages lie. Everything else lies.
But
wait,
everything you present to people lie, except for math.
I don't know.
Okay. So the fact that math is true, how does that prove that God is true?
Because that would ultimately have to be somebody would have to put that there.
No. So you think somebody could put math there? Math is an abstraction. Math is
I understand it's something we interpret.
It's not like 1 exists or 4 exists or addition exists. These are abstractions. These aren't things that exist. Math is the most pure way that we can describe the universe. But nobody had to invent math. We discovered these truths: identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle. And then math is basically set theory of how we're going to combine those things. And yes, I would agree with you that math is the closest thing to truth that we're likely to have. But what you're saying is there could not be math unless there was a God. And I don't know how you make that jump.
Because it's illogical. I mean,
no, what's illogical? What's illogical is to assert that something is contingent upon a God without being able to demonstrate that it's contingent upon a God. That's illogical.
I get what you're saying. It doesn't exactly prove the existence of God. But I mean, it's like sentences. I mean, eventually, you don't understand the concept of maybe 2 + 2 initially. But that concept got us to build spaceships, it got us all the way to a space station.
Wait, so math is pretty cool, but what does that have to do with a God?
And isn't language pretty cool too? I mean, aren't we essentially using language right now and not actually using math?
I want to know what God's communicating with math. He said it's the only thing that he uses to communicate with us. I want to know what he's communicating with it.
Betterment, I would think, because the more formulas we find out, the more advanced the further we get to advance.
He's telling us formulas?
So.
Well, formulas are what's helping us have further doubt.
Those are the things that we are discovering. These are truths about the universe that we are discovering. It's not like there's a God that is leading us to, a solution for Fermat's last theorem.
Like math shows us how things that that are actually real are. Like, if there's one person there, one person here, that's 2. But where's God?
I would imagine that, not so much in the one person here, one person there, but when the problems come about, we use math to make houses. We use math to make medicine.
Right, but that's to describe reality. It's just describing what we can already see, what we can already touch, it's just, I don't understand how you connect that to God.
But we may or may not use math to create art. We can, but we don't necessarily need to rely on mathematics to create art, and yet art inspires and beautifies our world. And it's true that we appreciate that. So there are things that are true that aren't, I mean, you may be able to use math to describe it, but even if you did that, it doesn't mean there's a God who needed to create math or use math to tell us about the world. Math is what we use to best describe the world.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
What if there wasn't a God?
If there wasn't a God, I would. This is only just assuming that I'm imagining. I would think there would be certain truths.
Why?
Because I mean, like, it's just hard for me to consider that this is all by chance.
I completely understand, and you're being really honest, and I really, really appreciate that. And it sounds like you're having a really hard time. So just try to take a deep breath and just take your time. There's no rush, okay? Just think on it.
But if everything, and this is directly spinning off what Jenna just asked, let's assume that there isn't a God, that there's nobody guiding the process or anything else, that the universe is as it appears, a universe with physical interactions and physical properties. What would that change about your life? Aren't the things that you love still the things that you love? Aren't the things that are beautiful to you still beautiful to you? Isn't 2 + 2 still equal to 4? Even if there's nobody guiding it.
Yes, ultimately.
And that's the thing Jenna's asking, and it was the same thing that I was asking before, in the sense that there's nothing about this universe that necessitates a God. And so what you seem to be doing is saying, oh, it's just difficult to understand how all of this could have happened by accident. But by accident is a particular phrasing that I find incredibly poisonous, because I'm not here by accident. The earth is not here by accident. We are both the natural results of physical processes. So when you set this up, you set up a false dichotomy. You say either everything happens by accident, or there's somebody governing and guiding all of it. When the evidence shows that the physical processes, the physical forces within the universe are the things that are determining how things interact, but not like there's a plan in place. And so you have the strong nuclear force, weak nuclear force, gravity, et cetera. And maybe we've just found another one, who knows? But it seems to be that what happened is somebody convinced you that it's either all just randomly, accidentally happening, or something is governing it. And I would say that, yes, something is governing it, the laws of physics, because physics is everything. There's no chemistry without physics. And you want to get back to that math is the foundation of it. Math is the abstraction we use to describe physics and everything else. And so we're not going to beat you up. I mean, if you're going to sit around and go, well, I just believe in a God that I can't detect, that doesn't interact in any way, that may or may not be communicating with us, the only thing I'll say is, you don't seem to really have a good reason to believe in that God, but I'm not convinced that it's doing you much harm. And it may be there to alleviate the stress of having to recognize that maybe there's nobody steering this. Maybe it is just physical interactions, because that can be uncomfortable.
How would you feel if you didn't think there was a God? If you looked and kept looking, and a year from now you find out that you don't find any reason to believe that there's any God? What would that mean for you?
Well, it's funny because I've been listening to you guys and talk to you guys for like a year now. And when people ask me, I do tell them that I'm atheist, because I have trouble believing in, like I said, conventional gods, because everybody believes in some form of a book God. Mm-hmm. So, but like personally, I'm trying to let go of the concept of God. This whole concept of God is in the numbers and everything like that. It was one day I was just thinking about it, and I was like, if there was anything that communicated us, it would be the truth of math. And I would think, if anything, that would be God-given. But that's why I reached out to you guys, because I wanted to let go of this idea.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with math being the best thing we can to describe reality. It seems to violate Occam's razor to go a step further and say, therefore, math has to be the language of God. But I will tell you that you are not alone, because the statement that you made is almost a modern direct quote from what Sir Isaac Newton wrote. And I would recommend, and I think it's on YouTube, it's one of my favorite videos of all time. It's a Disney production, and it's called Donald in Math Magic Land. It's less than a half. Please go watch it. Everybody should watch this thing. I watched this when I was a kid. It is incredibly impactful. It goes through and it shows phi and the golden spiral and the golden ratio, and then it shows billiards and the math behind all that, and music and the math behind that, and how math is there. And then it ends, or maybe begins, but I'm pretty sure it ends with a quote from Sir Isaac Newton that mathematics is the language with which God has written the universe. And as a metaphor, it's beautiful. As a way to understand the impact of math on describing the universe, it is beautiful. But if somebody were to look at that quote and say, wow, math proves there's a God, they have fundamentally misunderstood how we would go about proving something. It's not that a God was required for there to be mathematics. It's that Sir Isaac Newton and you, so you're in good company, look at the math that describes the universe and say, wow, this seems like it could be the sort of thing with which a God could have painted the universe that we're in. And that puts math in the state of being prescriptive, when I view math as a descriptive abstraction. And so I don't need to go the extra step. But if you just want to do it as a metaphor, maybe you're not comfortable with the atheist label, maybe you don't want to get into arguments and debates with somebody, and you want to do the, God is math, or math is God, or, it's not the worst idea anybody's ever had until you try to argue that there's an actual thinking agent entity behind it. And now you've gone a step beyond what Occam's razor would allow.
Do you have people to talk to about this, like to bounce ideas off of and ask questions other than us?
No, my girlfriend, that's about it.
You might want to try the ACA Discord, because there may be people in there that want to have those conversations. We may or may not be doing something with the Discord after the show's over. I'm waiting to hear. But on that note, we're over time, so I want to let you go, Tony. But by all means, find somebody to reach out to, whether it's the Discord, whether it's a local skeptic group. Obviously, I don't know whether Recovering from Religion would necessarily dig in on this here, but philosophy groups in your area, hit up the local university and see if there's a philosophy club or a skeptics drinking or non-drinking, if drinking is an issue, drinking skeptically, stuff like that. But yeah, you're not alone. You're in good company. It's just that I don't know how you can realistically get from, I think there is a God who's communicating with mathematics, and how it would perhaps just be much better to say, isn't this universe amazing, and aren't we learning a lot about it because of math? But also, go watch Donald in Math Magic Land.
You're doing good. You're asking the right questions.
It's an important... Yeah, go ahead.
No, I didn't hear exactly what Jenna said.
Oh, I said you're doing really good. You're asking the right questions.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thanks, Tony.
And I will definitely check out Donald in Mathematics, because I'm sure that will help a lot.
Math Magic Land, not Mathematics
Magic.
Land. Yeah, because
Magic.
You'll get it. Math Magic Land. It's so there were a handful of things that I've seen in my life that were groundbreaking in opening my mind up to certain things. Donald in Math Magic Land was the first time I saw something where I was like, whoa. I did not watch the original Cosmos when it first came out. I was a little too young for it. I will agree that it's incredible, it is important and worth watching. But the work of James Burke in both The Day the Universe Changed and Connections, the first series, that was wow. And these things build on each other. And then there's a number of, people ask, can you recommend a book? Yeah, and the first book I always recommend is Innumeracy by John Allen Paulus, which has nothing to do with religion. It has to do with how bad we are at math and how we lie with statistics. And all of those things were incredible eye-opening. So if you watch Donald in Math Magic Land, Connections, The Day the Universe Changed, and read a numeracy, and then read any religious text you want, and don't wind up an atheist, I don't know what to tell you.
The Inexplicable Universe.
There you go.
That one got me.
On that note, I'm gonna go ahead and end the show here. We'll take the last couple of callers. We'll take offline and then do the Discord thing, because I would imagine dinner's getting ready to show up, and we don't want to keep people from eating for too long. But thanks to all of you for watching. Thanks, Jenna, for being here. The people on the other side of the glass and the people on the other side of that wall, who are the ones that actually make this show happen and run. So a big round of applause for our crew back there. They can put themselves up and show them. And we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
What are we doing, man? What are we doing?
No, you're done.